I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and you. And I think to myself,
how did we get to this? The road to the plebiscite begins with this man. That's John Howard, the 25th Prime Minister of Australia. This man helped change the definition of marriage in Australia. Marriage laws used to be handled by each state. You were legally allowed to get married at the age of consent, but at the time that would vary from state to state. This would later be made federal in 1961 when the Marriage Act was brought in. That came with one fun little issue when it came to the definition of marriage. The definition of marriage came from a court case of Hyde v. Hyde, an 1866 case in the English courts, ruled over by Lord Penzance.
A pirate king.
That court case involved a priest wanting to divorce his wife for adultery, and when the case was dismissed, Lord Penzance said,
I conceive that marriage, as understood in Christendom, may for the purpose be defined as a voluntary union for life of one man and one woman to the exclusion of all others.
An official definition of marriage didn't turn up in the Australian Marriage Act until an amendment was brought up in 2004 by this man, Philip Ruddock. He put forward the Marriage Amendment Bill of 2004. The bill had two stated purposes. The first was to formally define marriage in the Marriage Act, and the other, to quote the bill itself, to ensure that same-sex marriages are not recognised as marriage in Australia, inclusive of those performed under the laws of another country that permits such unions. Within hours of this law passing, John Howard told reporters, "We've decided to insert this into the Marriage Act to make it very plain that that is our view of a marriage, and to also make it very plain that the definition of a marriage is something that should rest in the hands, ultimately, of the Parliament of the nation." These two men are why the term marriage is defined in the marriage law. Take a good look. These two men started all this. For many, it felt like this was going to be the new normal, or at least, that's what we thought. A poll in 2007 showed 57% of Australians believed that same-sex couples should be allowed to get married, and the numbers only grew since then. On the 12th of August 2015, Tony Abbott proposed a plebiscite as part of his bid to get re-elected. He pledged to hold a nationwide vote on the matter after the election was completed. He wasn't going to make it to that election because his party kicked him out shortly after that. His replacement, Malcolm Turnbull, had publicly proclaimed to be a supporter of the LGBT community. But he wanted to keep that top job, so he decided to continue the policy that Tony Abbott had come up with the month beforehand. Which is kind of funny when you consider that at the time, Turnbull said this.
The reason I haven't advocated a plebiscite after the next election is that it will mean that this issue is a live issue all the way up to the next election, and indeed at the next election.
And then, a month later,
there is no greater virtue in a free vote here or a plebiscite. They are each means of resolving the matter.
And that was taken to the next election, which wouldn't happen until 11 months later in July of 2016, when the Liberal Party won the election, and Malcolm Turnbull retained the Prime Minister's seat. And thus, the plebiscite was going to happen just after that, right? Well, if by just after you mean November of 2017. This was because preparing for the plebiscite was a nightmare. In October of 2016, a bill was put forward for the plebiscite and it passed the House 76 to 67. However, once it hit the Senate in November of that year, the bill failed thanks to Labour, the Greens, and the Xenophon teams combining in order to vote it down in a 33 to 29 vote. They tried again in August to get the plebiscite through, but it soon became obvious that wasn't going to happen. That's when the Liberal Party had an idea. An awful idea. The Libs had a terrible, awful idea. A postal survey. Something that wouldn't require legislation and could just be done by telling the Australian Bureau of Statistics to do it. So they did. The ABS would prepare a postal survey to be sent out to everyone on the electoral roll. who would have to send it back when the cutoff date was for voting in this non-binding plebiscite that would cost $88 million and had no bill attached. Once all that was decided on, the floodgates opened. Between the 12th of September and the 7th of November, the fight to sway public opinion was on, and it showed a harsh side to Australia that no one expected. While the Yes camp tried to show how important it was to give people equal rights, the No campaign, well, some tried to make it about safe schools, a controversial anti-bullying program. Others tried to make it about religious freedoms. Then there's the way the debate was carried on outside of TV commercials and pundits, and it wasn't pretty.
I'm fed up with a stupid world. Where's my dummy gun? Shoot 'em up, bang, bang, bang. I say we forget the noise. Take 'em one by one, get it done. Hey, hey, hey. How society live without the law. The hypocrisy, saying that you will but you won't. The audacity tells that our love is wrong. Get your rebel on. So stand up, light a fire up. Gotta fight to live how you wanna love. And they don't always sing a battle song. A revolution, get your rebel on. Stand up, light a fire up. Gotta fight to live how you wanna love. And they don't always sing a battle song. A revolution, get your rebel on. Get your rebel on. Get your rebel on.
After months and months of canvassing, advertisements, skywriting, and texts, the public sent in their forms, and on the 15th of November, the results were announced at 10 a.m.
And now the official results of the Australian Marriage Law Postal Survey. For the national result, yes responses, 7,817,247, representing 61.6% of clear responses.
When the announcement was read, I didn't cheer like the people on the news were. I was numb. I was in shock. For the first time since the postal survey was proposed, I had some sort of hope that maybe the government was going to treat the LGBT community as equals. And then I remembered, it's non-binding. They still had to vote on a bill in Parliament, a bill they hadn't even written yet. A bill was eventually written up by Dean Smith, a Liberal senator who not only made it so that it would allow same-sex marriage, but that there was a provision to allow ministers of religion the right to refuse to perform a marriage. It was a fair compromise that had cross-party support. It was overwhelmingly approved by Parliament, with only Bob Katter, Heath Pitt, David Littleproud, and Russell Broadbent voting no. For Katter, Pitt, and Littleproud, this fit in with how their electorate voted. Broadbent, however, decided to ignore his electorate entirely. But oh boy, if you want to be upset about people ignoring their constituents, let's look at those who abstained.
Fuck the motherfucker, fuck the motherfucker, fuck the motherfucker, he's a fucking motherfucker. Fuck the motherfucker, fuck the fucking fucker, fuck the motherfucker, he's a total fucking fucker. Fuck the motherfucker, fuck the motherfucker, fuck the motherfucker, fucking fuck the motherfucker. Fuck the motherfucker, fuck the motherfucking.
Tony Abbott made this postal survey happen. This man is why the LGBT community went through 3 months of hell. This man was told by his electorate to vote yes, and instead of doing what his electorate told him, or sticking by his convictions and voting no, he walked out. That, in my mind, is the worst part of all this. The result we saw was not the result brought on by the plebiscite. It would have happened this way regardless. 3 months of vilification, and it led to the same result we could have gotten if they had just done their fucking jobs.